Hey Photo Pros, Lauren here. Just wanted to show you how I use the tone curve to lift my midtones in my photos. So I chose 3 photos to show you today. So here, excuse me, is this photo with my edits applied, and then I just made a virtual copy and reset all the settings so I can start fresh. Again, here's one here, and again, just reset the photo, made a virtual copy before I reset the photo, and same with this one. So here are the original photos without any edits made. So on this first one, I will show you, I like using my tone curve in a linear fashion. So what this does is I just pull up the middle here and it lifts the midtones of the photo. So let me undo that really quickly. What most people use the tone curve for is to add contrast to their photo. So the way the tone curve works, you have your darks over here, your highlights over here, and then the midtones in the middle, and then here you have dark down at the bottom and light down at the top. So when I use it, I just lift it here, which is adjusting the midtones of the image and lifting them so that the darks and the highlights stay relatively the same. Now, most people use the tone curve to add contrast, so they will bring the darks down and bring the highlights up. So as you can see, that added a lot of contrast. In the case of this photo, we'd also need to increase the exposure. Now the white balance here is pretty crazy, so that's something that we need to adjust as well. But I am gonna go back and show you again, when I use my tone curve, I simply lift up the middle to lift the midtones. Then if I need to, I can still add some exposure, which will brighten the entire photo. So you can see the midtones, the highlights, the shadows are all being brightened as I increase the exposure here. Here, again, we also need to adjust the white balance. The lighting here was just crazy. You can see all this orange. I think in this, my final edit, I actually had well, first of all, I had a whole bunch of work that I did to it. You can see in my history panel here on the left. But I think I used, oh yeah, Radial Filter. I thought I maybe used a gradient filter to kind of get rid of some of this crazy coloring in the background. So I'm going to bring the exposure down just a little bit because I think that's a little bit too harsh. Let's try adding a gradient filter. So I'm just going to pull across. Let's change that to be a little bit darker. Let's make it cooler. I think I also desaturate it a little bit to try to make the background less distracting. You can then copy and paste those settings to make it stronger or to move it elsewhere. You can see it's dragging across the screen here. I'm actually going to delete that one. Let's go ahead and use a radial filter. So I'm going to put a filter on them. Bring the exposure down. Move the saturation down. A little bit of the warmth as well. So this highlight here is totally crazy, but I don't think I actually edited that when I originally edited this photo. Let's see what we can do about getting rid of it. I'm going to use that spot removal tool. Because it's on its head, right near his head there, I think I might need to pull that in Photoshop if I want to get rid of it completely. But sometimes I don't want to open Photoshop, and so I will just use the spot removal tool a couple of times, and it actually ends up working just fine. Looks a little wonky. Let's see about adding an adjustment brush to bring the exposure down right there. I think I'm trying too hard. I should probably just get back to my tone curve and worry about this later. Actually, I already delivered these files. These are from a military homecoming quite a few months ago. So let's try this one again. Here it's a little bit easier because of where the light hit her head. Much better. I don't like this spot out here either. Looks like it's just from my lens flare. So there you go. Yeah, his head looks a little wonky there, but I think I'd still go back and adjust it. So let's play with the overall white balance. A little bit cooler. This session, I'm not gonna lie, was really rough for white balance. I had a really hard time adjusting it. I remember I adjusted it, I don't know how many times. I just kept going back to it because the lighting was so tricky. I think that looks pretty okay there. Let's go back to my original edit. So you can see it's quite a bit different. I think this one actually looks better. I probably should have edited them all like this, but real life, even us mentors second guess our editing every now and then. So you tell me which you prefer. There's the first one. So this is my original edit, and then this is the edit that I just did. I think I prefer the second one. Anyways, moving on. So this is a photo of my son. This outfit that he had on was a hand-me-down from my husband. So my husband's grandmother made it for him back in the day when his dad, so my father-in-law, was deployed and coming back from a ship that the Shamrock was the emblem for that ship. So I should have put this on my son a couple of months beforehand, but I thought it was too big. And then one day I finally decided to just try it on him, and it was actually too small, but you know, story of my life. So here we go with the tone curve again. I'm going to boost those midtones. So here you can see quite a bit of a difference. Let me undo that really quickly. Quite a bit of a difference because it's lifting those soft shadows here, maintaining the color of the highlights relatively well, and also maintaining the color of the shadows relatively well. So let's do that again. It does affect them overall a little bit, as you can see, but I'll undo that. If we were to just bump up the exposure, actually, let me make another virtual copy and I'll show you the difference. So here I am going to bump up the exposure. Let's see if one stop is a little too far. So let's bring it down to 1/8 of a stop. Then here, let's adjust the midtones using my tone curve. And I'll show you the difference. So there's adjusting using the tone curve, adjusting using overall exposure. So you can see on this one, the entire photo, the highlights, the shadows, the midtones were all adjusted by using that exposure bumped. And then here, I just adjust the midtones, so I'm still maintaining those shadows and highlights a little bit better. So here, a little bit brighter overall. Here, a little bit shadows still are there, highlights are still there, midtones were just lifted a little bit. Again, in this situation, this is where I like using my profile corrections for my lens and also the transform. I always like to see, there we go, auto actually worked pretty well. Let's play with the white balance. So it just bumped, ooh, I'm losing my words here. Just bumped up the exposure a little bit and also just made the white balance a little bit warmer, which is fine. So let's look again at the exposure, tone curve. So very slight difference. I use this because I still want my photos to have, you know, a little bit of contrast in them without being too contrasty. So sometimes I even still will bring down the blacks a little bit to add a little bit more contrast. I prefer doing this method over using the S curve in the tone curve. But again, editing is all personal preference, so if you prefer using the S curve or any other way to use a tone curve, you definitely can. So this photo, I accidentally shot it a little bit dark. She was moving around a bunch, the lighting changed, and I didn't keep up with my settings. So here I'm going to bump the tone curve. I'm also going to bump the exposure overall, so maybe just a half a stop. Not even a half stop. There you go. So you can see when I'm adjusting the exposure, it's adjusting all parts of the photo, highlights, midtones, and shadows. When I adjust the tone curve, I think it's mainly boosting those midtones and the highlights and shadows. Yes, they do get adjusted, but not as much as if I were using the exposure slider. Again, I typically use these lens corrections for all of my photos, and this photo looks pretty straight. I sometimes will just see what Lightroom thinks it needs in terms of the transform. I actually prefer it without, I think. Because there's this pole in the background, it's pretty straight, just a little bit more straight, I think, and it's fine. So there you go. That is how I use the tone curve in my photos to lift the midtones. I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, let me know.